Looking upstream again from the walking bridge, if you look way up there, you can see the remnants of the upper dam, City Mills, where it was in relation. It was just upstream of that train trestle right there. When they removed that, again, just like the lower one, the Phenix Dam, they left a little bit of it on either side of it just as a marker for historical significance. That is about the midway point of the Whitewater Course, is right about where that dam is. So probably about half a mile at least from where I'm standing right now. Looking downstream from the walking bridge, you can see a much better view of one of those mill buildings that was turned into condos. They call it the Rapids. You sort of see that sign right there, the Rapids. I don't know about the Rapids, but one thing's for sure, those condos facing the river have an unbelievable view from their balconies. That bridge right there is the 13th Street Bridge. It is one of 3 bridges that connect Columbus to Phenix City, Alabama by car. And then this one that I'm on right now, the walking bridge, connects it by foot, of course. This is the area where we sampled to see what happened to the fish when the dams came out. Sampled here in 14, 15, and again in 17. So a couple years after the dam came out, the first dam came out, and then 5 years after the first dam came out. So how do you sample a place like this? Obviously, you can't get a boat in there. There's no boat ramps. There's no way to get a boat in here. None of us are really whitewater raft certified, nor did we have at that time an electric fishing raft. So we had to use canoes. We had to use shocking canoes. I had developed a handheld electric fishing apparatus that could be operated out of a canoe, a metal canoe. Later on, a plastic canoe with metal droppers as the cathode. And so we were in here with the canoes, and believe me, it was tough sledding. This is not for the faint of heart. And so much of our sampling in these streams and rivers for black bass, it was not for the faint of heart. It is not like backing a boat down to a reservoir and going out with a motorboat. We did a lot of pretty hairy work at times, and this is some of the hairiest we've probably done. Adding to the fact that at certain time of the day, the dams upstream are going to start releasing water, and all of a sudden the water go up 2 to 3 feet and turn this into a raging hellstorm that we had to get out of. They did have sirens, but they still only gave you a couple minutes, maybe 15 at the very most, probably more like 10. So when you heard the sirens, everything stopped, and you took a run to the bank to get out before bad things started happening. And there's some pictures following here that are going to show you some of the pictures that we took while we were out there sampling. Okay, so how do you sample an area that is inherently dangerous? So this is a picture taken actually from 2009, prior to the dam removals. This is the Eagle Phenix powerhouse, and a boat with Georgia DNR biologists. We're sampling for bass. And this is below the Eagle Phenix Dam. You can see this is where Wave Shaper Island is now, on the right-hand side of this picture. And you can see the dam with the bridge in the background there. And the dam, of course, is now long gone. Another picture of the dam, just to give you an idea of what this area looked like prior to the removals. This is another picture. This is actually the City Mills pond or pool looking upstream. So you can see this was a very different environment than back then than it is now. And back then we had no idea the amount of rock that was underneath the water here. Some of this water was relatively deep, 6 to 8 feet in a lot of places, and so you really weren't sure what was down there. This is another picture of the same pool looking now downstream towards the City Mills, the actual City Mills Dam, which was the upper one that was taken out. And so here we are today. And so again, this is looking across towards Wave Shaper Island. You can see where the dam used to be, looking at the shoreline there on the Georgia side. We're looking from Alabama across towards Georgia. And so the environment has changed quite a bit. And then as tough as it was to get in that area before the dams were removed, after, it was quite an enterprise to get sampling gear into what is essentially a whitewater rafting course. So here's two of my students with our shocking canoe set up. And the canoe is fine in normal areas, but when you get to something like this, you're not taking a canoe through that. Certainly not one that's got $5,000 or $6,000 worth of sampling equipment in it. So you have to get out and portage everything around there. It was very difficult. It was dangerous. And to add to the fun, of course, the dam upstream was still generating power, just like it always has. And so when the sirens went off, you had a mad scramble to get to the bank and haul everything up these really steep banks with no paths or anything else to get out of there before watery death overcame you. So it was definitely not for the faint of heart. There's a reason why people don't typically do this. So these are pictures of us sampling within the whitewater stretch. Over here on the left, we had just gotten everything down from the trucks to get ready for our day. And then over here on the right-hand side, this is two of the folks sampling in the middle of that run. This is right near where that steamboat pier is. And then you have to pull over and you work up all the fish. And of course, you have to bring as much light stuff as possible. You can't carry a bunch of heavy, full workup stuff. So you're mostly just crouching like animals on the gravel bars and measuring and weighing fish and taking data. And again, really, really strenuous days of sampling, but we got it done and we got some data. Yes, it was not easy. And, sampling was definitely, the efficiency wasn't as good as we would have liked, but it was the best we could do. So here at the level of a river, the first thing that has to get mentioned about, the results of our study is how this river is set up right here in this stretch. Rivers are all different, and different parts of the river are all different. But I just want you to see how high the banks are when you're sitting down at the river level and you're looking up. The bank over there on the Phenix City side in Alabama, I'll look a little closer over there. That thing's probably 25 feet above our head, maybe 30. Over here, the river walks a little closer than that. In this particular spot, there's a lot of places here where the bank is 20 feet or more above the river. And it's that way up and down the whole river. Not only that, these are cities on either side of it. So over the centuries that these cities have been here, they have taken defensive measures, if you will, to try to limit the flooding, to build up a lot of walls and high banks to keep their cities from flooding, and just let the water go downstream further to where there's basically almost few people who live there. That characterizes some of our results here. If you remove those dams in an area where you didn't have these two cities and you didn't have, high banks, things might have been a little different. Keep in mind, there are still hydropower dams upstream of here, so the water does go up and down, and there's nowhere for it to go. So when they turn the water on here, the river doesn't really spread out like a lot of times it would, because there's nowhere to spread out to. The cities have seen to that, and possibly the natural topography was that way anyway. Not all, rivers have areas where you have high banks and the water just gets higher, deeper, and faster. And that's what happens here when they turn those dams on. So removing the dams or not, this is still a pretty harsh area to live if you're a fish. And keep that in mind when we talk a little bit more about what has happened to the fish community here now that the dams have been removed. So, looking at some of the results of the study, I just tried to summarize this as quickly and easily as possible. So I'm going to show you a series of these graphs, and we divided the study area up into really three different areas. One was between the North Highlands Dam and the City Mills Dam site. So that was the upper part of the whitewater stretch. And then we had a pre-sample that was actually taken by folks from Columbus State University using an electrofishing boat and some backpack shockers. And then we had post-sampling, which is just absolute combined fall and summer samples from 2014 and 15, and another summer sample from 2017, and just pulled the sample together to get a picture of what's happening here. And so if you just look at these pie charts, you see that, there's not a huge difference in what was going on after the dams were removed. The biggest difference here is it seems that spotted bass have been taking over the area, and considering they're an invasive species and not native, that's not necessarily a good thing. The largemouth bass may have slightly declined. The pre-sample didn't even collect any shoal bass. We collected a very few. In both cases, the dominant species were sunfish. And so the river species, as we call it, species that would be more commonly found in rivers than in, say, reservoirs or lakes, they were a minor component of the fish community before and after. Moving downstream to the next site, this is between the old City Mills Dam site and the Eagle Phenix site. This is kind of the upper part of that area because that big chute that I showed you from the walking bridge in that video, that really was like, if we went over that, we could never get back up it, and the only other way to get out was to shoot the wave shaper class 3 rapid, and we didn't want to do that. So we cut it off about halfway down, but it's still, this shows you about the same exact thing. In this case, there's virtually no difference in pre versus post. Sunfish are overwhelmingly the dominant species that we found. Spotted bass, 20 to 25% of the sample. Shoal bass were never a big part of that area, although to be fair, they're not easy to collect. We know they were there in fishable numbers prior to the dam removals, and they were probably much lower than that in the post. Once again, the river obligate species, the fish that are happy and at home at rivers, they're a minor component of this area. And the final one is the area below the Eagle Phenix Dam site. This one's very different. It basically is the headwaters of Walter F. George Reservoir downstream. And so there were a lot of species in this stretch of the river that were not found above there. Now, pre-dam removal, you saw that big concrete dam that goes across there, and that stopped them from going upstream. But what we really found was post-removal, you still didn't see those species upstream of that area. Species like flathead catfish, which are an invasive and we don't want them up there anyway. Several species of suckers, gars, skipjack herring, channel catfish, and blue catfish in particular, which is another invasive species, so we're not really sad that they're not up there. Striped bass, there was a lot of fish that you just didn't really see upstream of that area, and it was a real head scratcher. When you remove a dam, you're expecting to see these big changes, and we frankly just didn't. And so again, if you look at the pre versus post, you see that shoal bass really declined. The spotted bass numbers seem like they also declined. Largemouth bass declined. Sunfish increased. And in both pre and post, these river species, a lot of which really were kind of more in the reservoir downstream, but they did a lot of movement. They're all found below the old Eagle Phenix site, both when the dam was there and when the dam wasn't there. And again, it just points to that idea that when you remove a bunch of material or you move it around and you're trying to create an exciting whitewater course, you're probably also creating fish barriers even without the actual concrete structure. Certainly some fish get above that, but not nearly as many as we would have expected, especially when you consider floods where the entire riverwalk can be underwater. There's certainly plenty of lateral areas of lower current that fish could navigate around some of these barriers at low water, and they just didn't seem to do it. Or if they did, they went back downstream when the water went down. It's hard to say which it was. And a lot of these river species are harder to catch. Now, the down here, we're using a boat shocker in both pre and post because we could. We did some canoe shocking in the post as well. There wasn't any way to do boat shocking within the actual whitewater stretch. So we're certainly missing some species, but the fact is that we're just looking at occurrence, and yeah, they're harder to catch. But after all the sampling, I mean, it was 5 distinct samplings with 40 or 50 transects. You think you would actually at least see one every once in a while. We didn't see these fish up there, even if we didn't get a net on them. We didn't see them, so it seems pretty clear that there really wasn't a much of a difference in this case. Removing the dams didn't really seem to make much of a difference in the fish community in this case. If we just focus in on the black bass and just look at the composition of the black bass community, again, we're going to use these 3 areas. So here's North Highlands down to City Mills. That's the upper part of the whitewater course. Largemouth bass were pretty were had a they had a pretty good slice of the pie, and they took a big hit after the dams went out. Big surprise. Largemouths do live in rivers and they do live in streams, but they're not a big fan of whitewater stretches, I suspect, and they were a lot more at home when those were quasi ponds versus what they are now. I think that the real take home from this graph is that both before and after, the black bass community was dominated by spotted bass, which are a non-native species and have hybridized with a lot of the locals, especially shoal bass. The pre, once again, didn't get any shoal bass in the pre in that stretch, and we got some. We know they were there. I don't know how they missed them in 2010 with the boat, because I've been in the City Mills pool before with a boat. We did it in 2009, and we collected some shoal bass there. So, but regardless of the lack thereof, it's not like the shoal bass were in there where they'd be more than 10% of the bass population just based on what you catch there. Spotted bass are the big dog there. You look going downstream to the next site, you see very similar scenario here. Here we did catch they did catch shoal bass in the pre-sample, and we continued to catch them there. Once again, largemouth bass took a big hit, but overall, the big dog here in black bass community is spotted bass, the invasive species there. And below the old Eagle Phenix site, the farthest downstream, the largemouth bass did not change any. That's the most lake-like of the areas because if they swim downstream just a little bit from the Wave Shaper Island, it rapidly starts becoming the headwaters of Walter F. George. So largemouth bass really didn't change any. We see a big decline in shoal bass. That's matched by what anglers are catching too. But either way, spotted bass were and continue to be the main black bass in this whole stretch, both above and below the dams that were removed. And in the Bibb Pond, which I didn't even mention, but that's the one that's above North Highlands Dam, and that dam was not removed. There was no alteration in habitat up there. Spotted bass are definitely the dominant black bass there too. So it's one of those things where it's like you have to wonder, what did that area truly look like 60 years ago before spotted bass got put in there? Was it 9% largemouth and 91% shoal bass? I really wonder. But bottom line is, it doesn't matter so much what it was back then. What matters is that now, with the dams, without the dams, the area is still dominated by a non-native invasive species, the spotted bass. So one more way to look at things. What I did was I just looked at the percent of the sample of different species. And this is just by the total number of fish that we caught. How did they break down into species? And the species themselves don't really matter. All that really matters in this particular graph is that they are stacked up exactly equal to each other. So the same bar on the top corresponds to the same bar on the bottom. And so you have your pre-conditions and your post conditions. And then the similarity index that we're using here is a simple way of comparing distributions of two samples, and it ranges from 0 to 1. And the closer to 1 it gets, the more similar it is. And scientists that use this index typically consider anything over 0.6 to be pretty similar. So you can see that in this case, if you want to think of it this way, these two samples are about 85% similar to each other. So they're highly, highly similar. And it just goes back to what we were saying is that there really wasn't a lot of difference in these samples. In this particular case, the one thing that jumps out is they caught more bluegill than we did in the pre versus the post. And they caught, well, some striped bass anyway, and we did not. I will point out that they were actually sampling more in the spring than we were, and that's when the stripers are up in those kinds of habitats. So that could be part of it. We collected more spotted bass than they did. If we go back to the lower part of the whitewater course here, we got a few more species, so there's more bars to look at. It looks a little confusing, but if you just look at broad patterns, they're not really that different. And again, the similarity here is about 0.74. They're still highly similar. And finally, if we look at the lower part, below Eagle Phenix, you see here, of course, like I said before, we got lots and lots of species down there. That was the most speciose part of the whole area, which again is so striking, so classic of a barrier. Above the barrier, you have these depauperate fish communities with 10 to 15 species of fish that we collect, and most of them happen to be, lake or reservoir like species, like sunfish and like bass and like crappie and some catfish and that kind of thing. And then you get below Eagle Phenix, and yeah, you see your sunfish and you see your bass, but you also see 3 species of suckers, and you see 3 species of catfish, and you see some darters, and you see some minnows that you don't see above there, and you see some shads that you don't see as much up there. So that's the first thing. Notice how many more species we got below those barriers, both pre and post. And then if you just look at broad patterns again, you're seeing that if you had a tall bar of one of these species above pre, you generally had the tall bar in the post. There's a few differences here and there in that case. Overall, the samples were pretty darn similar with an index of 0.77. Again, 0.6 and above is considered to be pretty similar, and these were all well above that. And it just points to, again, that removing these dams did not really have a large effect on the fish community. So one of the things we do see that had that changed during this period is shoal bass. Shoal bass were found in this area on a pretty regular basis. This is a 6.5 pounder that we shocked below Eagle Phenix in 2009. And the shoal bass have largely disappeared from this area, and we don't really understand why. What we did see is we see a lot of these spotted bass. Like I said, the fish on the left, upper left, is kind of more of an Alabama bass look to it. This fish on the right, in the upper right, your classic, what I call the real Chattahoochee bass. It's some wacky hybrid of spotted bass and Alabama bass and who knows what else. What we didn't see a lot of when we were sampling there were these little shoal bass, indicating some kind of recruitment. It's not what we expected. We did really think the one thing the dam removals would do is give the shoal bass more room, more fast flowing habitat to be in. It didn't seem to work out that way. And this probably goes back to, the morphology there. The banks are really high. Showed that in the video. And if the banks are high and there's nowhere for the flow to go but up and fast, that's not the same thing as a more natural part of the river, where when you flood, the river goes up way up on the banks, and the river gets really wide and it slows down on the edges, and there's places for fish to go and hide, and that's not really the case in this stretch of river. So when you look at what this area here where the old dam was, again, the dam is right there, so we're just downstream of the old dam. You look at where the old dam was and you wonder, well, why are the fish not able to move upstream very easily from here? or why do they choose not to? And you see it when there's really generating a lot of power, and you can understand that this is still a pretty formidable barrier for any kind of fish to get over, and it's even higher over on the Alabama side. So it's understandable on one level why we would see a lack of species making it up above, and there's more of those kinds of shoots up above here.